I think we can start with the first question about what you are the founder of Permaculture, and I want to know what exactly it means permaculture for you.
Yes, well, I found this question a very difficult one for many years after the publication of Permaculture 1 in 1978, because permaculture in many ways is a theory of everything, and could be problematic in this way. But the simple description I use is that it is a design system for sustainable living and land use. So it is concerned with both the production side of the equation,
yes,
of how we get our needs from nature, and the consumption side, how we live, what are our values and our behaviours, and what are the human psychosocial processes which relate to our basic needs of food and shelter and water, etc. So the important part there is that permaculture as a design system is not limited to a particular method or strategy or technique, but it is taking the sort of thinking which is normal in the design professions but is not necessarily normal in other areas of activity or life, where we look at things from first principles and say, how should this be designed? And of course the beginnings of that was to look at agriculture, permaculture being a contraction of permanent agriculture, but from the beginning implying the contraction of permanent culture. Now today in English we would probably use the word sustainability instead of permanent, because of course permaculture's origins predate the sustainability discourse. It is in some ways very simple as a design system, but it can draw in many different approaches which we would associate with the concepts of permanence or sustainability. And of course the key issue there is
yes,
how would this work without the subsidy of non-renewable resources such as fossil fuels? And of course that is the great question, yes, that everything we currently do depends on this non-renewable input, which is clearly,
yes,
not sustainable.
Yes.
So because that input has been so fundamental to everything in the modern world, to consider a future without it requires a design from first principles, that we have to go back to the drawing board rather than just modify or reform the systems that already exist.
yeah.
So that is the premise of the need for active design rather than just the introduction of new elements or new technologies or new methods.
Yes.
You mentioned about this. Who is this targeted towards?
Yes.
Primarily because permaculture involved this radical redesign from first principles, it was inevitable that it had to be directed to innovative experimenters, individuals and people operating at the household level, at the independent farmer level, who could, by their own decisions, choose to do these things, rather than being aimed at large institutional structures or corporations or, at the level of nation-state politics. So right from the beginning, it was focused at people who were questioning, the fundamental premises of society. And in that way, it could be seen as fringe or countercultural. But that was inevitable and necessary because it's not possible to postulate a redesign of a large-scale system to that system, because the structural impediments are so overwhelming, because so many established power interests stand to lose by any redesign. And secondly, because of the radical nature of permaculture, it is both practically important and sort of necessary, I believe, from an ethical point of view, that we should try whether this can be done at a small scale by individuals before saying we should redesign the whole of society from the top. Because many grand schemes for redesign of society at the top have led to terrible failures or terrible consequences. Perhaps, most notably, utopian socialism leading to the communist states. So, although permaculture was not conceived of as a sort of a political or social change process, it was more directed at people who were saying, well, we don't want to spend all our effort fighting against the world we don't want. We want to put our energies into creating the world we do want.
Okay.
Yeah, so inevitably that was people saying, no, we are just going to do this because we think it is a better way to do things or whatever. And of course, to a significant extent, permaculture has been effective at that level rather than addressing institutional or sort of larger structures in society.
Okay, so it is a bottom-up approach.
Yeah. And that a lot of this is misunderstood for various reasons, that people think, therefore it is not significant or can't have a big influence in society because only very limited things occur at this scale. But I believe that's, there are fundamental misunderstandings about that from a systems point of view, from a design science point of view, that says, no, the permaculture approach in working from the bottom up has a lot of support, not just, that's some sort of personal cultural preference, but from a systems theory point of view, this is actually a more effective way to change society. So, in that way, permaculture is quite a challenge to conventional ideas of how change comes about in society. But it's not articulated primarily as that. It's articulated as a practical thing that people can do where they can get a benefit from it, and that in the process they're doing something which is beneficial for the planet and beneficial for society. But it starts really with that self-interest, whereas a lot of ideas of political and social change start with that big, this is what's for the good of the whole, how do we now devote ourselves to that work? Permaculture starts at the other end and says, you want something to eat that's clean and fresh food. You want some independence with water supply and provision of your basic needs. How can we do this through that self-interest, which is, of course, always present?